Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome today. We're just starting to let people into the webinar, so hopefully you can hear me and you're enjoying a lovely sunny day and all of that kind of stuff. We're here to try and explain how we can help you go from confusion to clarity. That's the theme of the webinar today. A grand objective for Thursday morning. Oh, particularly when my numbers have gone up to 40 and then back down again. So this is an interesting little game of teams bingo.
Hey, thank you, everyone.
Hello. Right, so welcome everybody. I'm just going to keep going through some general hellos and housekeeping admin as we let people in. So this is an exciting moment for us because this is a webinar that's not just open to members but open to non-members as well. Oh, I've got a hand up already. Quan, is there a problem? Can you hear, not hear? Oh,
Any issues with sound or anything, if you could just pop it in the Q&A or either leave and re-enter, that should resolve the issues.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. Oh, our numbers are going up and down quite a lot. Is that?
I think it's fine. We've got about 118 so far in the main room, and they're still coming in thick and fast. So we'll just handle the admittance, Jude. Don't worry about that one.
Excellent. It looks like there's only 2 people in the thing for me, which just doesn't seem quite right. But there we go. So long as everybody can hear me. Okay. So while we're great, thank you. While we're letting everybody in, I'm going to ask Charlie if you can take me to the next slide, and I can just start giving you the kind of like the welcome and housekeeping. So I'm Jude Allen. It's lovely to see you all. I'm the interim MD here at OPRL. Just to let you know, thank you. Just to let you know that your microphones, cameras, and the chat function are disabled for the duration of the webinar. But the Q&A function is live, so please do use this to ask your questions. We'd love to have your questions. We will get through as many as we can during the session, but if we can't get through them in the session, we will try and answer them afterwards. And they are really helpful to us because they really help us to understand how we can best help you. So please do ask some questions. The slides and a recording of the session will be shared following the webinar, so you don't need to try and make notes all the way through. You can sit back and enjoy it and take it all in, soak it all in. If at any point the slides or the sound are not working for you, please, our recommendation would be that you just leave and re-enter. It's the classic, just switch it off and on again, and hopefully that will rectify the situation and obviously ensure your computer audio is turned on. All of those things. So as I say, I know we've had loads of people joining in as I've been saying all of that, so I'm going to repeat it just for fun. So I'm Jude Allen. I'm the interim MD at OPRL. I'm very excited to welcome you here. I know that we've got a real nice mix this time of members and non-members, so I'm very excited that you're all here and that you're giving us an hour of your Thursday morning. Your microphones, cameras, chat function are disabled for the duration of the webinar, but the Q&A function is live. Please do use it. Use it to ask your questions, and please just ask whatever questions you have. preferably relevant, but and we will try and get to as many as we can in the little session that we have at the end of the webinar. But if we don't get to them, we will definitely read them. We will try and work out how we can best answer them. And your questions really help us to help you. So if you do have a question, please do put it in there. If there's something that you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that, then just pop it in, and we'll get to it, and we'll use it. The slides and a recording of the session will be shared following the webinar. They'll absolutely be shared on our member hub for our members, but we will also make sure that we share for any of you non-members that haven't joined and don't know the luxury of the member hub, which is newly revamped and beautiful. But so you will get that, and maybe we can draw you in. So how are we doing with?
I think we're okay to move on to the next slide.
Shall we move on? Great, thank you. Charlie, if I could have the next slide, please. Lovely. So this is what we're going to plan to do with your next 55 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit just about who OPRL are and what we do. And then Adam is going to talk you through some of the consumer research highlights of the research that we've done earlier this year. And then Alice will take you through the legislative confusion of things and try and make them clearer for you, because there is a lot going on. Alice and I have spent the last couple of days at the Environmental Packaging Conference talking about all of the things going on, and there is a lot of confusion, but there's also some clarity that we can bring, and so that is what Alice is going to look to do for you. And then in the we've got 10 minutes or so to do a bit of a Q&A. So if you've got any of those questions, please do put them in, and we will try and answer as many of them as possible in a quick fire kind of thing. And if we don't get to them, we will still look at them and try and address them afterwards. So as I said in the introduction, please do put any questions that you have. That's really helpful for us, and we will try and make the most of your questions to help you. And then I'm just going to do a wrap up at about 5 to 11, and thank you for your time, and send you on your way. So just to get us going, I'm going to start with just an introduction of who OPRL are and what we do. Hopefully most of you will know this, but just to take us through. So OPRL launched 16 years ago now. We are not for profit. We're limited by guarantee, with any surpluses being reinvested into our activities, which is really important because we are at a time when we really need to make sure that we are promoting the recycling of packaging and doing our bit, playing our part for you guys. So that's where kind of like your membership fees go into making the whole thing better for you and for everybody else. So thank you very much for that. So we have a team that provides expert support and tools to help businesses navigate the complexities of recyclability of packaging. So we've talked about, as I say, Alice and I have been at a conference for the last couple of days. We talked about the fact that there is so much complexity in packaging and recyclability, and therefore, even even those of us that have worked in packaging for a long time will still kind of go, well, what do I need to do with this? So therefore we know that there are questions that our members will ask that you need help with in order to get the right labeling, to manage your way through the RAM and all of that kind of stuff, and we're here to support that. But we're also here to represent our members in key industry discussions and making sure that the voice is heard and that packaging and labeling decisions are made with the latest knowledge and insight. We really care about that. Any of you that have seen me at conferences and listen to Alice talking at events, we are relentlessly positive about the need to really do that and be as informed as possible. And all of that is because we want to make it a world where packaging doesn't go to waste. That's our vision. Charlie, if you can move me on to the next slide, please. And just, all of the details about us. Our governance is a board of independent directors who bring a wide mix of packaging business and other skills to us, as you would expect. Our operating model is that we have the exclusive license from WRAP to use the Recycle Now iconography, which is really well known and understood. And we'll talk a little bit more about the recognition of that in the consumer research. And our guarantors, the important thing about the guarantors is we're backed by organisations across all of the different material sectors. OPRL is materials agnostic. We are not about promoting any one material over another. In my mind, it's about the right material in the right place, in the right format for the right purpose. And that's, in fact, that's what OPRL is all about. So we are very much about making sure that we have the in-depth knowledge from all of the relevant material groups, but we look at it in a material agnostic frame. Charlie, next slide, please. So about the scheme and about what OPRL is all about, and we are more than just the label. So we are about simple and consistent recycling labels, and those labels are based on collections, recyclability and end market, which is really important. It's like, it's not just what would we want to be recyclable, but what is actually recyclable. What can you do with it? We know that 3 in 4 consumers recognise and act on our labels. We'll talk more about that shortly. But as I say, we are more than just the labels. So we're about the tools and the membership support when you need it. And we're at the heart of the recycling industry and packaging reforms, which is really important because we have that voice for you. And we really talk about how integral the citizen is in making EPR a success. And the only way they can do it is if they're informed and instructed and enabled to make the right decision in that split second when they're over the bin. What do I do with this packaging? Can I recycle it? Do I not recycle it? Which is the most important. Charlie, next slide, please. So about those labels, where possible, we promote the use of 2 primary labels. So recycle, do not recycle, which sounds really simple because it's a binary choice. As many of you will know, it's not ever necessarily quite so simple because of the decisions that have to be made and the nuances of packaging. But we go with the idea of the binary labels in order to make it as clear as possible for the consumer what they do. And part of that is that, like Alice and the team, the member support team, are doing the hard work to help enable you to give the consumer that clear decision. So we know there's a lot of work to get to be able to put something very simple on pack. But, that's what we're aiming to do wherever possible. We're aiming to go, you either can recycle this or you do not recycle it. And do not recycle is as important a message as recycle, because wish cycling contaminate and causes a problem. So that's the labels. But if you click onto the next slide for me, please. We also have some additional labels because sometimes binary is just not enough. Sometimes there are specialists. So we have things where there are take back schemes. So the recycle bags at large supermarkets. We've got some labels around refill because we know that we're not recycling our way out of the problems that we have. Refill is also an important factor. Many of you have multi-components to your packaging, and so we need to do that. And you can now have up to 4 labels that you can download yourself. And we also have the UK only. So that is a whistle-stop tour through OPRL and what we're all about. Now I'm going to hand over to Adam, and he is going to talk you through the consumer research highlights. So Charlie, next slide for Adam, please.
Thank you, Jude, and that's a tough act to follow, isn't it? So yeah, if I could have the next slide, please, Charlie. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the consumer research that we carried out in April 2025, which sampled 5,000 consumers, well, just over 5,000 consumers in the UK, including England, Scotland and Wales. We didn't carry out one in Northern Ireland because there wasn't enough of a sample for that, but we're looking to factor that into our next consumer research to make sure that we cover that sort of whole breadth and depth really. But you'll see from the consumer research that we have carried out that we split it across a good age bracket, different percentages within each of those ages, different percentages across those 3 devolved nations. And then we have a gender split of women and men, 48% men, 51% women. And of children in the household, there was 36% of those that were surveyed that had children in the household. And this combines robust quantitative survey data, which was rich in qualitative feedback to inform the development of OPRL's labelling strategy. So if I could have the next slide, please. So one of the main questions that we asked was, where do you get your knowledge of what can be recycled and how you do it? And you'll see there that across the 4 years that we've carried this survey out on 2018, 2021, 2023 and 2025, that 89% has been a consistent number saying what it says on the packaging. So that remains the #1 source of where people find out how to recycle their packaging at the end of life. But interestingly, what we've seen on this particular survey was that there's been an increase in people asking friends, family, neighbours, and looking online at websites such as YouTube, Facebook, and Google, and that's increased quite significantly since the previous years. So that's an interesting find for us, and that just highlights the evidence and the need to ensure that there's labelling on packaging that tells the consumer how to dispose of it when it's time to get rid of that packaging. And as Jude said, it's really important to have a recycle label and a do not recycle label, or one of our additional labels on there, just to make sure that they do know what to do with that at the end of life. And then if I could have the next slide, please, Charlie. So we asked how confident are you, which each of these labels means, and we included a selection of our own labels, as you'll see down the bottom there, those binary labels: recycle, do not recycle, or don't recycle. And then we include some of our sort of other labels, such as widely recycled and not yet recycled. And you'll see that the confidence in the meaning of those labels is strongest for the OPRL labels in that blue line there, where it says 81% on recycle, 72% on don't, and 71% on do not. And then you go right across and you've got other labels in there intermingled, such as the Keep Britain Tidy, the Mobius Loop, the Green Dot, the Resin Code, TerraCycle, and we included for this year the French Triman logo, because we're seeing that more and more on packaging now in the UK as well. But the confidence remains strongest for those OPRL labels at the beginning there. If I could have the next slide, please, Charlie. Okay, so the next question was around our calls to actions on packaging. So you'll see on many of our packaging, we have different calls to action depending on the material and what's inside that packaging or what's contained on it, such as films and sleeves, etc. And you'll see that most of those instructions are really followed, always following the instructions. So such as empty, remove film, remove sleeve, rinse, clean, cap on, lid on, check home collections, and you'll see that it starts to go down when we ask consumers to do additional things like take things back to supermarkets or recycling at shops, etc. That instruction tends to be less recognised or acted upon, but it's still higher than the rest of them. So we know that, yes, 44% are saying recycle with bags at large supermarkets. They always follow that instruction, but that's not necessarily representative of what we're seeing in those films coming back to supermarkets either. So I say that's with a bit of a pinch of salt, really. And a key finding that we found here was that additional explanation behind actions increased the chances of compliance, and it highlights the values of pairing education, storytelling, and labelling all together. So additional key messages on packaging is also really helpful. If I could have the next slide, please, Charlie. So this is about the recycling labels and the influence that it has on consumer preferences. And we asked, to what extent does a recycling label influence your decision on which brand to purchase? And you'll see in that sort of pie chart there that we have, I would much prefer to buy a brand that has a clear labelling to tell me how to recycle the packaging. And that was the strongest at 41%. With 26% saying I would slightly prefer to buy a brand that has a clear labelling on how to recycle the packaging, and 33%, which is actually an increase slightly from the previous survey, saying it would not influence my decision on what to purchase. And a key finding here is there is still a preference for brands to use clear recycling labels at that point of purchasing packaging or disposing it. If I could have the next slide, please, Charlie. So to summarise, and the full survey will be sent out shortly, so you'll be able to see this, but 81% of consumers use OPRL labels to know if packaging can be recycled, with 91% of them recognising the recycle label and 96% being confident that they know what it means. 89% of consumers use what it says on packaging to know if something can be recycled, with 83% of consumers believing recycling is important. And 52% of those consumers feel very confident about what they can and cannot recycle. Could I have the next slide, please, Charlie? To summarize all of that, so there's long-term improvements in attitudes. So we've seen that there's been a long-term increase in positive sentiments towards recycling, and it's significantly more that consumers feeling confident versus our 2018 data when we started this. Recycling labels remain important at point of disposal. So absolutely, as Jude said as well in her opening, that those labels are important, whether that is recycle, do not recycle, recycle at front of stores, etc. Those labels are all just as important. And then there's greater usage and awareness of OPRL's logos. So consumers are more likely to say they use our logos to understand how to recycle that packaging versus our 2018 data when we started this survey. And I think that's my slides done. That was a real whistle-stop tour, but as I say, we will be sending out more information after this webinar. I'm going to hand over now to Alice, who's going to talk to you a little bit about legislation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adam. Yes, what I thought I'd do, is just to give you a bit of an overview on the different pieces of legislation that are coming that are impacting packaging. We're all well aware, I'm sure, of the extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging and the impacts of that. But I'm actually going to start with the collection side and think about simpler recycling. So if we can move on to the next slide then, Charlie. Simpler recycling has been talked about for quite some time, but it was previously known as consistency in recycling, and the name was changed. And the idea behind it is that effectively, wherever you live across England, you will have the same set of materials collected from your household for recycling. And it's actually mirrored in businesses as well. So you should find that you have the same set of materials being collected for recycling from businesses, from your workplaces, and then this will be matched in the home. So the business collections were due to come in from the 1st of April this year. So you've probably seen some changes where you work, or you've seen some changes out and about. I know it's taking a little bit of time for some people. We still don't have our recycling bins in the office, which, as you can imagine, is a great source of discontent for us, but never mind, we'll move on. And what's also happened with this is that it's being matched by similar pieces of legislation in the devolved administration. So as much as simpler recycling is relevant for England only, there are other pieces of legislation that are coming for Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland that match it. So it means that same set of materials is being collected across the UK. So if we can move on then, Charlie, please. Just to give you an idea of timings for this, so as I said, the business collections came in from 31st of March this year, but for households, by the 31st of March next year, we should all be able to have collections of paper and card, which will preferably be separate, but they don't have to be, rigid plastics, so plastic pots, tubs, trays, tubes, that sort of thing, and where they're being collected on their own, then liquid beverage cartons will be included in those collections. We'll also have glass collections and metal collections and food waste collections, which is a new thing that a lot of local authorities will be looking at. And then from the following year, so from the 31st of March 2027, those collections will then be extended to include some films as well. So polyolefin-based films, that's the mono-PE, mono-PP, or where you've got a mixture of the two. They will be able to go into our household waste recycling bins, which is really exciting. And particularly when we think about what Adam was talking about in terms of those consumer behaviours, we know that when you ask people to do something else, it's a barrier. So we've got collections for films at the moment, but we have to store them at home, and then we have to remember to take them to the supermarket. And that is a barrier for people. So hopefully when we have got those films being collected from our homes, it's going to make life a lot easier, and we're going to start to see that volume of film being collected going up. Okay, what does this mean for labelling? Let's have a look. Well, obviously, one of the great things is it's going to reduce some confusion. Adam talked about how when we look at where do people get their knowledge about recycling, we've got more people now who are actually asking friends and family or looking online, which is great. But if your friend or your family doesn't live in the same local authority area as you, then they could have a different collection as you, and actually they might end up giving you the wrong information. So once we've got that same set of collections, the same set of materials, sorry, being collected, it's going to reduce some of that confusion. And as I said, it's also going to reduce those barriers. So the fact that we won't be having to collect our films up separately and take them back to the store is hopefully going to improve things. We are also aware that it also means now that we're going to have more things that are going to be able to have that recycle label. So it's really going to help with that move to a binary approach. But there are still going to be some materials that will never make it through the system that we have currently. So there will still be take back schemes needed, particularly when we think about those small items, things like some of that cosmetic packaging that we've got, blister packs. We're starting to see take back schemes for those now. And just those things that are just a little bit more tricky and a little bit more complex. So that's simpler recycling. Let's move on then and talk a bit more about EPR, so extended producer responsibility for packaging, and also the RAM, or the recyclability assessment methodology. Sorry, we are peppered with acronyms in this section. So just a bit of a reminder of those key dates that we've had recently for extended producer responsibility. So we had our latest version of the base fees that were published back in the end of February, beginning of March. We've then had a big round of data collection that happened the 1st of April. So we had large producers were submitting their second half of data for 2024, and the small producers were submitting all of their data for 2024. And we also were meant to have all producers registered for the EPR scheme, regardless of whether they were large or small, by the 1st of April. So we are due to have any day now the final version of the base fees coming out. And having been at the conference that we were at yesterday, Jude and I, we attended the Environmental Packaging Summit. There were people there speaking from PAC UK and from DEFRA, and they were pretty confident that this would happen, that we would be getting that final version of base fees before the end of this month. And I think also because of the fact that they've had this volume of data in, we've got to expect there might be a little bit of change in those fees as well. Hopefully favourable, but we will wait and see what comes out of that. So looking forward then, we've got some key dates coming up in the beginning of October. This will be when large producers are submitting their data for the first half of this year, including the RAM assessments, so including those recyclability assessments that you've done on your packaging. One of the other things that came out of the conference yesterday is that their regulators have been asked to look at how they can ensure that actually, if producers aren't able to complete all of their RAM assessments by the 1st of October, that they won't be followed up with some compliance action. And I think that is looking very positive and likely to happen. So we will wait for confirmation fully, but generally it's a recognition of the fact that the timescales have been really tight, and there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done for those RAM assessments to be completed. So that's a really positive step, obviously, for producers and the data that you've got to gather. So 1st of October as well, you will also be receiving your first invoices, and the invoices will be based on the base fees. So these, we'll have a look at those in a minute, but the base fees per material, and those invoices will be coming out, like I said, in October. And the reason why those invoices are important, going back to the simpler recycling, is because the invoices, then the money from those, will be used by the local authorities to fund their collection schemes and to make sure that that material that's being placed on the market is able to make it back through the process and be recycled. Okay, let's move on then and have a look at the recyclability assessment methodology. Hopefully you've all heard of this already. I'll just go through kind of some of the top line and then how it works and look at what that means in practice. So this is the device that's being used to determine the recyclability of packaging. And the reason why that's important is because they are also going to bring in modulated fees. And the modulation level is based on the recyclability of your packaging. So effectively, where you have packaging that is less recyclable, you will have a higher fee for it. And where you have packaging that is more recyclable, you will have a lower fee. And what the recyclability assessment methodology does is it looks at how that material, how that piece of packaging is collected, sorted, reprocessed, and then the application of that final material, which is very similar to how we look at labeling. So if we can just have a look on to the next slide then, Charlie, please. When you think about the recyclability assessment methodology, what it will do is it's looking at the material level. So it breaks it down currently into 8 categories. You've got paper and board, fiber-based composite materials, plastics, which are rigid and flexible, although there has been some talk about splitting those out to 2 separate categories. So you'd have a category for rigid plastics and a category for flexible plastics. You've got steel, aluminium, glass, wood, and then other. And when you do your assessments, you need to be assessing that piece of packaging on what the predominant material is for that piece of packaging. So where you have a piece of packaging, let's say, that's made up of, I'm going to make this up entirely, but let's say it's kind of like a 40% paper, 40% aluminium foil, and a 20% plastic. That's a really bad example because I've just made it really tricky for myself. I'll change the figures. 45% paper, 35% aluminium foil, and 20% plastic. Then you would go on the predominant material, which is then paper. I think it's important to say at this point, with a previous example that I gave, where you're not sure, it's always best to talk to PAC UK and ask them the question, because they know exactly how they want that reported, or even speak to the regulator, so the Environment Agency or SEPA, talk to them and understand how they want that reported. So you do your recyclability assessment and it gives you your outcome based on how recyclable it is, your piece of packaging is, and that outcome is based on a RAG rating. So you've got red, amber, green, where green is the most recyclable, and it's going to make it through the process that we have here. Amber, it is recyclable, but there's going to be some challenges there that mean that material perhaps is not going to be the best quality. And red, which means that actually at the moment it's really difficult to recycle that material at scale and it's not going to make it through the process. So what we wanted to look at is just how that works for some of the materials, and particularly for paper, board, and fiber-based composites, because this is quite a new thing. We've never really separated them out in this way before. And what it depends on is actually the plastic content that you've got and the amount of plastic that you've got there in that piece of packaging. So the first question that it asks is, do you have a layer of plastic in there? And is your layer of plastic less than 5% by total weight? And if you answer yes to that, then you can move into the paper and board category. If you answer no to that, then you move into the fiber-based composite category. And the RAG rating that you get, so the red, amber, and green, then there are further questions that help determine that. And that then looks at a broader non-paper content category. So this is where you'd be including not just any plastic, but any other kind of laminations that you might have or coatings that you might have. We're expecting to get some more clarity on that hopefully soon in the guidance that's being produced, just to have a full understanding of what's included in that non-paper content category. The other thing just to note is that for fiber-based composite packaging, they've actually split it out into 2 further categories. So you've got one group which is liquid cartons, and then you've got a separate group which is for non-liquid cartons. So, the other kind of fiber-based composite packaging that you might see on the market. At the moment, liquid cartons are capped at an amber because their collection level is not enough for them to move to green. But liquid cartons are one of the materials that will be collected as part of the simpler recycling scheme. So we are seeing that lots of local authorities who weren't collecting them curbside are now bringing those in. And we absolutely expect that by next March, they'll have reached that 75% local authority collection rate coverage. And in fact, they might have gone further. From the conversations that we've been having with ACE UK, that's the organisation that represents that carton recycling. They're looking really positive in those figures. So that's a really promising thing. So I guess the other thing to bear in mind about the RAM is that we are expecting there will be another version to come. We had various versions already. This is RAM version 1.1 that we're working on. And we know that there have been some things taken out of the RAM in RAM version 1.1, and PAC UK have said that they're going to look at those, and there's a chance that they may come back in. So don't think that this is it. We've got to be prepared to be flexible with this and anticipate some change. But one thing I just wanted to talk about at this time is one of the tools that we've got then that could help you with your RAM assessment. So we've gone for the snappy title of RAT, the Recyclability Assessment Tool. And what we've done is we've aligned that then with RAM version 1.1. And effectively, we've taken the questions out of that and designed it so that you can run through them. You can basically put in information. We will ask the questions. You put the information in, and we will then give you your RAM output. So you'll get that red, amber, green for the different material, and you can use that for your reporting. Okay, Charlie, let's move on then and just have a quick look at the fees. So I've got a slide here. This is the wrong date, apologies. So this is for the version that we got in the spring, but this is the latest fees that we've had. And as I said, high probability that this is going to change in the next couple of days. But currently, these are the fees. So these are the base fees. And this is what the invoices will be based on when they come out in October this year. And this effectively is there to make sure that the cost of the collection of that material is being covered. So that's where we're at currently. But like I said, be prepared for a bit of change on that one. And then if we move on to the next slide, we can just have a look at what's going to happen when the modulation comes in. So this is going to come in from October next year, so from October 2026. And as I've said, the whole idea behind the modulation is that that red fee then is the least recyclable, and that will be the one that pays the highest fee. And there's quite a steep incline there, a steep increase over the next few years on that red fee. The modulation factor increases over the next 3 years to really kind of push up the fee. And the idea behind the red then is that the increase in fee on the red goes to discount the green fee. So effectively, the more you pay on the red means that less will be paid on the green. Sorry, it's really complicated to get your head around. So we don't know what the green fees are going to look like yet, because it kind of depends how much red material is being placed on the market. And so we expect some more information on these fees probably next year. This modulation methodology at the moment is kind of what the proposal has been. There was a survey that went out on this a few months ago, and I think they're just working their way through this, but it looks like it will stay something quite similar to this, I think. So we will wait and see when that comes out. Okay, let's stop talking about extended producible responsibility and move on to deposit return schemes. This may not be something that affects all of you, but I wanted to talk about it because it is quite interesting when you think about the different materials that are being collected. So deposit return scheme generally applies to beverage containers. So anything that's being used for drinks effectively. And there are 2 schemes currently in the UK. We don't have a UK-wide scheme. We are looking at 2 separate ones. So we've got England, Northern Ireland and Scotland. They're going together. They have a deposit management organisation in place, so a DMO, and they are now pushing forward with thinking about the detail of the scheme. So what's it going to look like? How's it going to operate? what are the deposit levels going to be, all of that sort of stuff. But we know that, like I said, it applies to drinks containers, that it will apply to those containers that range from 150 millilitres to 3 litres, that it will cover aluminium and steel cans and PET bottles, and it will start from October 2027. So Wales is a little bit different. They haven't joined in with the rest of the UK, and I think this is partly because they want to try and include glass bottles in their scheme. So it's the same size of containers, but they want to be able to include glass bottles. They haven't confirmed a start date yet, partly because they are looking to do some consultation over the summer about how this could work. I think they're also really keen to look at refill options. And I guess around glass bottles, there's a lot of opportunity about refill and reuse as well. So there's a little bit more detail that we need there on that one. And so we'll keep up to date with that. We are having conversations with the DMO as well, because one of the things that will need to come for the DRS scheme is a DRS label. And so we're talking to them and just kind of coming with our experience in labelling, what works, how you communicate those messages. We want to make sure we can share our learnings with them and help if we can, basically. Okay, so the other thing that we wanted to touch on is just looking at what's coming out from a wider approach and the EU labelling work that's being done as part of PPWR. So PPWR is the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulations. It covers all sorts of things to do with packaging. There's information in there about making sure that only recyclable packaging is placed on the market, that where you have plastic packaging, that it's got recycled content in, looking at refill and reuse again. But it also includes a requirement to label packaging to help with its sorting. So effectively, this is to show the material that the packaging is made of, and then link that to the system that there is in that member state country, to show how that material has to be disposed of, so which bin it goes into effectively. What we are anticipating here is it will be introduced through an implementing act, which is expected in August next year. They are kind of working on the final version of the proposal at the moment, and we've been asked to give some feedback on that. So we've been lucky to be included to it as a stakeholder as part of that process. And I think the plan is that the labelling proposal will go to the member states this summer for them to feedback and agree on, so that it's ready for the act to come into place in August next year, so August 2026. And the plan then is that the labels have to be adopted 24 months after the introduction of the Act. So this is an EU scheme, it's for EU member states, and they would expect then those labels to be on packaging effectively by August 2028, or 2 years after that implementing act. If the implementing act isn't next August, if it gets pushed back, they've got 2 years then to apply those labels. And what we know, obviously, is the UK is no longer part of the EU. So the UK government are looking very closely at what happens with this. And once they know the details, they will then decide how far they are going to go to align with those proposals. I think it's fair to say that the government we have now are a lot more open to aligning with Europe. They are having more conversations and are working more closely with than the previous government that we have. So we don't know for certain, obviously, but it is looking quite positive in terms of that alignment at the moment. But we will wait and see. We're having conversations with them as much as we can just to keep up to date. And as soon as we have more information on that, then we will share that with you guys. Okay, I think that is all of my slides. So I think we can move on to questions, Adam.
No problem. So I'll just start from the bottom. And I like this one because it starts with I work in wine.
Oh, nice.
We have some confusion over the recyclability of the flexible plastic bag in our bag-in-box wines. We cannot get a sensible answer from our suppliers as to whether the plastic bag can go into large supermarket flexible plastic take-back schemes with the tap still attached. This not only impacts the OPRL logo we put on our product, but also how we assess these bags under RAM and the RAM rating outcome.
Okay,
our
so
thoughts on that.
this will depend on what the polymer of your bag is and what the polymer of your tap is. From an OPRL point of view, for the flexible plastic collections, we have said that as long as the polymers are the same, so if you've got a PP bag and you've got a PP tap, then yes, that's fine. We're happy for that bag to go in, and we've spoken to the reprocessors and those people that are collecting the material, and yes, that's absolutely fine. We've got some information on this in our labeling rules because I think there's some extra requirements around it, but certainly if the polymers are the same, then that's not an issue. And actually thinking about it, it's not just the polymers are the same, but if it's because you can get mixed polyolefins included in the collection, you could have a PP bag with a PE tap or the other way around, and that would still be okay. So that polyolefin family is okay. From the RAM side of point of view, I'll be honest with you, I am not entirely sure. I can't remember that there's anything in the RAM specifically about rigid attachments on flexibles. I don't think there is, but it's a while since I read that section. So maybe that's one for us to take away and just confirm, I think, rather than me guess and get it wrong.
Oh, thank you, Alice. The next question is there any update on when the B2B labeling tool will be available online, please?
Yeah, I'm really sorry about this. I have to admit we got very distracted with the RAM and our wrap tool, so that took our focus for a bit. But we've got it on our plates. We're fully aware of the need for it. We just need to make sure that the systems we've got are the most robust, but we are looking to get going on that pretty soon. So bear with us and we will get that for you. For those of you who aren't aware, so obviously our labels are for consumers, but we do also have labels for packaging that's going into businesses. And now that simpler recycling is in place for businesses, so now that we know those collection of materials is there for businesses as well, then it just helps to make sure that material is being collected and going to the right place.
Oh, thank you, Alice. And this is a question about the RAM. So why isn't the RAM clear about PET lidding film when attached to PET tray as peel and reseal? If classed as one unit, then PET tray is red if attached label sleeve are PET with density greater than 1 gram centimeter free. When it's referring to label, does it also mean lidding film?
I'm going to be honest with you. We don't know is the answer to that question. I think that's something that you need to speak to Pack UK about. It's specifically, we've had that same thought ourselves. It is a label or a sleeve the same as a lidding film. The detail is not there. We have asked the question and haven't had a response yet, but I think they've got lots of questions that they are working their way through. So one of the things maybe we can do is just share the email address for Pack UK inquiries afterwards. But yeah, I'm afraid we can't help with that one. Sorry.
Thank you. We've got a couple of questions on PPWR next, Alice. So one of them was, is there any liaison activities for EU PPWR new pack labelling? And that you mentioned you were in contact with EU for PPWR. However, my question is related to the fact that companies that sell all over EU will then include a UK label plus an EU label. You mentioned alignment. Will that mean that we may have a unique label?
We may not. I guess that's the difficulty. So yeah, we are doing what we can to keep up to date and to be involved in those conversations around PPWR and be aware of what those changes are going to be. I guess until we know exactly what direction the government's going to go in, I don't want to make a promise that there'll be one label. We appreciate that consistency and simplicity is so much easier for the consumer, but I don't really want to say yes or no for certain because I'm afraid we just don't know. But what we will do is we will keep as up to date as we can, and as soon as we know, we will make sure that we share that information with you guys.
Thank you, Alice. And I suppose that sort of answers the future of OPRL in Northern Ireland in light of EU's planned harmonisation as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The next question is about PEPR data. Will it include the RAM assessment? What does it mean exactly to include the final output from the assessment or any other document, including the output report from the tool?
Okay, so I'm going to give you what I understand, but I would again say this question is probably best to direct to PAC UK or to the, I think there might be a separate email address for data queries. But my understanding is when you report your data, you do that on a material level, and you will then need to say how much of your, let's say, paper and board is red, how much is amber, how much is green. And so that is how I understand it will work. You basically work through your packaging, you work out what the RAM rating is, and then you would aggregate those up together to get them on a material level. But probably best again to direct that question to PAC UK and the data team there. They'll be able to give you the detailed answer.
Great, and we'll share that email address with the follow-up information.
Thank you.
On the same sort of vein, really, around RAM assessments, not typically finding all the information on a packaging specification sheet. How would they complete an assessment without all of that information?
That's a really tricky question, isn't it? And I think that's a real challenge that a lot of people are facing at the moment. And I guess it's great then that we've seen, you know, as I said, from the conference we went to, PAC UK are looking at how if you don't manage to do your assessments this time round, there's no kind of follow-up compliance action. So recognizing the pressures that people are facing. I think, to be honest with you, and this is probably my opinion, but if this information is going to be needed for recyclability assessments, and effectively you are going to be paying based on your recyclability assessment, then that information needs to be available. So whether it's the suppliers have to do the assessments and give you the information, if they're not happy to share that data, do they do the assessments for you and then provide the information for you? I don't think, I can't see in the long run a way around it unless the recyclability assessment changes greatly and the level of information required changes. I think it's something that we need to kind of look at and see how the process goes, basically, because, you know, when you hear PAC UK talking about the scheme and how it's working, they are very conscious that they can't get everything right at the start, but they want to get going and to build on it. And so I think that's one of the areas that they will be looking at, about how can they improve and how can they make it easier.
Cool, thank you, Alice. The next question is around the fibre-based composite category in the RAM. They're wondering, will there be a fibre-based composite category, not for liquid cartons, but instead for other material types such as pouches, boxes, bottles, which have a greater than 5% plastic content but are not cartons?
Yeah, so there is, sorry, on the slide that I showed, there's the fibre-based composite category splits into two. So you've got liquid cartons, which always tend to have more than 5% plastic content, and then other packaging. So this would be your boxes, pouches, bottles, whatever you've got. There is it's called non-liquid cartons, which I guess it says what it does, but it's not very exciting. So there is a category for those. So that is there on the RAM.
The next question is as a general rule principle, would card with a wax liner that is not recyclable have greater RAM fee than a plastic recyclable bottle?
That's a really tricky question and an interesting question. And I don't know is the honest answer. It will depend on the base fees and the level of modulation that's applied. I think we need to wait until we see what happens with these revised base fees that are coming out, and then when we know what the modulation levels will be. So I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, wonderful. The next one's from Wine again. I've used OPRL's rat tool to practice assessing our glass wine bottle. The rat tool seems to assess our screw cap capsule as one component. This is confusing us because we have had feedback from DEFRA that our screw caps need to be assessed as two components. The removable portion of the screw cap assessed as one component, and then the skirt of the screw cap assessed as a part of the glass bottle because it isn't removable by hand. Maybe I've interpreted the rat question incorrectly. What is your opinion on how we should RAM assess our screw caps?
So we took the approach that screw caps, to encourage the capture, to enable them to be captured. Actually, as we say to the consumer at the moment, it's better if they can be returned to the bottle, which is why the kind of we're thinking of it as the bottle is the skirt and the cap on the bottle, basically. So that's why we've done it that way. Maybe we need to have a look at that again then and just double check the wording. It's interesting that they're saying that you should do the cap separately. Leave that with us. We'll have a look and come back to you on that one.
And then we've got, do we think PCR content will be included in future EPR modulation for reduced fees, 3 to 5 years time, question mark?
It's a really good question, Steve. I do think, and I'm going to be me as Alice here rather than an OPRL view, I do think that we will see EPR moving to broader criteria. And I wouldn't be surprised if they start to look to align more with the criteria that there are in PPWR. So the European legislation, which does include that recycled content requirement. So I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. Hopefully Jude's not coming on to tell me I've got it wrong, but just to tell me to shut up instead.
I'm not coming on to tell you that you've got it wrong. I wouldn't dream of doing that. I think you've handled the questions very, very well. I think it's been really interesting, some of the questions that have come in, and it's a really it highlights some of the challenges of the RAM. I think it's worth repeating what Margaret said actually in the keynote speech at the conference that we've just been at, that EPR is happening and it is definitely here. They know it's not perfect, and I think that is an important thing. It will evolve, it will develop. She referenced the fact that, and I can't remember how many times she said, but it was I think maybe 14 times that the German EPR scheme had to be amended in order to get to a point where it was working really, really well. And that has always been the thing with EPR, that it's such a massive thing, it's such a massive change that it needs to come in a kind of like, this is the first draft of it effectively, but it's operating and it's starting to work, and it will evolve. So things like some of the details within the RAM that are not necessarily quite so clear, will continue to evolve. That will happen over time. So it will evolve and develop, and that is naturally how it should work, and is the nature of introducing anything so massive and significant. I think the other thing that certainly comes through in some of the questions kind of goes back to what you were saying, Alice, in terms of the timing and alignment. It is a massive question. It is a question that I ask constantly, of like, how are we going to know when we'll have any idea about what the labeling will be. All we can do at the moment is all of the things that we are doing on behalf of OPRL, on behalf of our members, and just kind of like within the industry, of going, EPR will only succeed if the consumer is able to do their thing and play their part. So we know from the consumer research that we've done, that Adam took you through, that the labels, the OPRL labels, are well recognized, they're acted on, that more people are using them, and that is all a really good thing. And we are really going out there as much as possible into any of the discussions about what happens, to really make sure that people are aware of that and they understand that. But then there is the added complexity of the fact that within Europe there will be the labelling guidelines that go with PPWR, and we are feeding into that. Alice is been very much working on all of our behalves to kind of like be involved in those conversations, so that we're at least at the table. And that's the best thing that we can do. We can be at the table. And that's what Alice is doing and representing. There is a kind of like there's a flow chart for all of this in the PPWR labeling guidelines need to come out. That needs to be there so that then we can see what the European Union are saying that all of their member states should be doing. Once we know what that is, and we can start to see how the different member states interpret that and absorb that into their their packaging, then we can look at how the UK aligns with that and what alignment looks like. How aligned is aligned? All of those questions are to come, and they are difficult. And we know that they are difficult, and we know that it's complicated. And that's part of what, kind of like Alice and I are very much aware of, the fact that we need to be on top of what's happening so that we can help to make it as easy as possible for you guys to be able to understand what you need to do. We are very well aware that a lot of you are global brands. You're kind of like, you have many markets in which you will be putting your products, and there are quite a surprisingly large number of EPR schemes across the world, and that will continue. And they will all have slightly different labeling functions. So we are trying to make sure that we are as compatible as possible, that we kind of like we are playing our part. And the thing that I really want to say as a kind of like a wrap up of today is, first, thank you everybody for listening to us today. The theme of today was about trying to take confusion to clarity. That is a long journey. We are working hard to try and do that, and we will continue to do these things so that we kind of like keep you as updated as we possibly can, and we continue to work on your behalf. So with that, I'm going to wrap up the webinar and give you back your day. Thank you very much for sharing the last hour with us. We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you. We hope it's been useful. We hope it's been interesting. But as I say, please just stick with us, and we will work on your behalf, and we will keep you as informed as possible, and together we will get through the changes that will happen over the next few years. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. As we said at the beginning, the slides and the recording will be available for you. So if you didn't manage to join the whole thing, then please do that, and we'll share with anybody who's not a member. And please join us if you're not a member. It'd be lovely to have you on board. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much to my brilliant OPRL team. You are fabulous as always. And we hopefully will see you again soon.
Thanks all.
Bye.